welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. Please introduce yourself and share with us your journey on mindfulness.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Whitney. I consider you a friend, so I'm more than happy to always connect with you. My name is Primrose Igonar, and professionally, I am psychology faculty at Marian Technical College. I've been doing that for the past 5 years. A couple of years ago, I also became the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Coordinator. And personally, I am married, have been married for 20 years. I have two sons, one is 19 and one is 13 going on 30. So you wanted me to tell you about my journey so far?
Yeah, I'd love to just hear about your journey and how you practice mindfulness, or, one thing I've always noticed about you is how gentle you are. And I've really admired that because over the years, sometimes I get very hyper aroused and excited. And just this past summer, have spent more time practicing calm and meditation and kind of trying to anchor my work in that space.
Well, good for you. And I can relate to that because when I was younger, your age, that's kind of how I was. So this is something that kind of comes with age and experience, and like you said, reflection, right? So for me, mindfulness can have two connotations. The one is from my therapeutic technique background. So I'm a clinical psychologist by trade. So mindfulness in working with clients, I could do it in that way. But I really like the definition that speaks about mindfulness being connected or interconnected with others, being conscious or aware of others. So when I speak about it today, that's the kind of the two hats that I'll be wearing with regards to that. So for instance, when we talk about interconnectedness, I consider myself a global citizen because I was born in Uganda, grew up in South Africa, worked and lived in Singapore, the United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom, Canada, and now here. And just by virtue of being in these different spaces, I have developed mindfulness without really being conscious of it, right? So you're connecting with people that are different from you. You are not just aware of yourself, but you're also aware of the other, how they present themselves. So I think that's probably where, and maybe I can use the word grace. A lot of people have commented on the fact that they find me to be graceful, which I absolutely love because I would never have picked that. But yes, that whole thing of extending grace towards others, because you don't know their story. You can't put your history on them. You've really got to meet them where they're at. So not so much gentle, but I can see where the gentle comes in, but more the whole notion of extending grace. And then of course, therapeutically, as a psychologist, working with clients, encouraging them to be in the moment, no matter how painful, no matter how difficult, and just kind of getting to a point of acceptance. So that's another way that I would utilize mindfulness in my practice. Although I no longer practice, I practice in South Africa, England, and Canada, but I'm not practicing here. Instead, I'm teaching. So I hope that says a bit.
Yeah, that is so beautiful. I was thinking of a lot of different things, like how we practice mindfulness in our own bodies, and then how we harmonize and extend grace with other bodies, and seeing how they are connected.
Absolutely. And in fact, that comment just reminded me of something else I wanted to say. I think in a lot of developing countries, let me speak of Africa as a continent, we would do mindfulness in a more collective way, right? So in this part of the world, it's very individual. In Africa, people dancing together. I don't know if you can see my picture over here, right? So dancing together, connected, singing together, drumming together. And I think that's where that part about being conscious of the other kind of comes into play there.
Yeah, that's really healing to hear, because I've always had this relationship with belonging that is something that growing up in Western society, I felt like I've had to earn or be invited into. And kind of as a result, that's made me believe in false notions to compete with one another and to set like this false notion of
Right.
disconnection.
Absolutely.
So that kind of results in like competition and fear and paranoia. Um, and I noticed that in my body, like that I'm pointing to my chest so much because I feel that constriction here. Uh,
Right.
rather when I acknowledge that I belong to a people and I belong to a place, I have much more openness in my chest, and more
Right.
curiosity.
That's so interesting to me because when I think about the developed world, a lot happens here in the mind, not really in the body. So for you, even as a young girl growing up here, you kind of sense that, right? And so to find people that are of like mind must have been so important to you. And when I consider the work that we do, the people that we both know, I'm happy you found us and we found you.
Yeah, I always say that I feel like in the last 3 years I found my people and it has
Yeah,
given me so much healing. And it's that healing that comes from the collective.
absolutely.
That's really been a process, some people would say, of decolonizing my heart and mind and thinking more with a lens of indigenous ways of knowing and learning so much from you and African traditions and the notion of Ubuntu, which I hope I'm saying that right. And I wondered, how do you say, and what is the meaning of that?
Okay, it's actually Ubuntu. So Ubuntu. So you were kind of close. So try it. Ubuntu.
Ubuntu?
There we go. There we
Okay.
go. Okay, so it basically means humanity towards others. So think about that. That's kind of what we've just been talking about, but we called it mindfulness, right? And you talked about indigenous ways of knowing. These are common sense things to us, but we haven't had the, I don't know, I don't want to use the word expertise, but we haven't had that notion of putting it on paper and having it published, right? So when we talk about it, it really lights this candle in me saying, hey, this is actually what we've been doing. And this is what I find a lot with Africa. A lot of times we talk about all the negative connotations of Africa, but yet there's so much to learn. And maybe because we haven't, boasted about what we know and kind of put it out there, people assume that we don't have it. Meanwhile, it's there. So Ubuntu is humanity towards others. I am Primrose because you are Whitney. I cannot go through life without you and vice versa. So again, talking there about that interconnectedness. So people like the late Nelson Mandela, President Nelson Mandela, and Archbishop Desmond Tutu actually made the whole notion popular. They brought it into the Western sphere of understanding. And when I think about Archbishop Desmond Tutu's work with the Truth and Reconciliation Council of that happened in South Africa following apartheid, I was also privy to part of that when I lived in Canada. So looking at reconciliation between white people and Native Americans, I can really see how this Ubuntu plays such a huge role there. Because I might not have done anything to you specifically, but I can still extend compassion and empathy and be one with you in your suffering, in your healing. And so, yes, Ubuntu should really be a philosophy of life for all, regardless of where it originates from. I could go on and on about Ubuntu, and it's a pity I didn't bring, I have a little red book called Everyday Ubuntu, written by the granddaughter of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. How awesome is that?
Wow, yeah, I'm gonna have to look that up. That sounds really good.
Yeah, it is. It's a really good book. It's an easy read.
And it is that for me, it is that daily practice, and I often refer to it as like shedding because I feel it like down my arms, like this shedding process that I have to kind of go through day by day of shedding those notions of individualism and even shedding the notion of things can be solved solely through our cognition and our minds.
Right, right. I like that. Absolutely.
I mean, I think that's how we've approached a lot of these contentious topics of 2020 is, you know, looking at mask or no mask and all lives matter, Black Lives Matter, and we're trying to solve so much with our minds, and it hasn't gotten us anywhere. We've put on workshops and trainings and
Yeah.
how we can kind of anchor more of this body connection.
Absolutely. And it's interesting you're talking about the body connection, because when I practiced in South Africa, unfortunately, I was trained in a Western model of clinical psychology. Fortunately, there was a number of us in the class who questioned that, right? Here we are in South Africa, and we're learning about tests that are used in America. How do we make them applicable? How do we develop our own? And what we discovered there, and I'm talking now specifically about South African Black people, was a lot of times psychological disorders like depression and anxiety manifested in somatic symptoms, not necessarily somebody saying, I feel sad. I think because this and this happened, I'm feeling this way. It was more like, I can feel ants crawling up and down my body. And the more we interacted with these individuals and heard what they were saying, the more we were able to understand what they were talking about. So when somebody comes in and they tell you that they feel like ants are crawling up, hey, that might be depression or anxiety. How are we going to help in treatment modality here? So again, that whole bodily sensation and the very important role it actually plays.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And when you're talking about depression and anxiety, I'm thinking about the time we're in right now of social distancing and isolation matched with civil unrest that is polarizing, and
Yes.
like all these forces that are separating us from one another.
Right.
How might we return to wholeness? How might we reconcile with one another and have collective healing?
Right. You know, believe it or not, something like the internet has definitely helped with that. Can you imagine if we didn't have this Zoom session? We would just be maybe speaking over the phone if we were lucky, but not being able to see one another's facial expressions, right? So the internet does have its purpose, right? Not always the best, but certainly in terms of that. Something else that I've found over this period is the joy, going back to the joy of reading. I have read so much on this whole, or these various issues. So from white fragility to, so now you want to talk about race. And it has informed me greatly. And because of that, when I now engage in conversations, because I have that information, number one, I feel more empowered to speak because I have knowledge. But also number two, that reading on my own has allowed me to reflect on myself. How can I become a better person? And so when I'm interacting with people now, being very conscious of that, and I think it's helping. Also, I find, for instance, I spoke earlier about being the DEI coordinator at MTC. I find that if we start off these, what I call courageous conversations, with people doing work on their own, right? So either watching webinars, doing training online, reading, it helps empower them to then come in person and actually have the conversations. So I'm hoping by next spring, we'll be done with COVID. People will have learned, feel empowered, have done all this reflection. And when we get together, we can actually do the deep work of having these courageous conversations.
Yeah, I really love that. There's all these book clubs right now, and I love the idea that you're promoting of education as empowerment. I think even for myself, reading books give me a feeling like I know these people, these authors, Robin DiAngelo and Resmaa Menakem, they're my friends. You know, they have no clue who I really am, but
Exactly.
you know, reading their stories and feeling empowered, and then with social media, being able to connect, you know, to their daily lives, what they post and how they reflect.
Right. I mean, President Mandela, also fondly known as Madiba, talked about education being the most powerful weapon to change the world. And if you think about how he was part of Umkhonto Wesizwe, which was known as Spear of the Nation. So when he was much younger, he wanted to fight the apartheid nation, right? So physically fight them. But after spending that time in jail in solitude for 27 years, came out with a different idea of how to reconcile Blacks and whites in South Africa. And there he talked about education. So again, reading, that solitary confinement, reflection, educating yourself can change so many things in the world that we see today.
That is really helpful. My mind's going in a lot of different directions, but one thing I wanted to make sure to ask is, how might we collectively and individually bend our mindfulness programming to be more distinct and to honor the perspectives and the wisdom of people of color? At Ohio State, we have this mindful wellness program. And quite frankly, a lot of our references and resources are from white authors. And you talked about white psychology before. I think of the arc of justice being long. How might we ourselves bend and also bend with others to honor diverse mindfulness practices?
I think that's a great question. And really what comes to mind is to meet them where they're at. So for instance, in Africa, the oral tradition is so much more important than the written word. And if we just look at things from a written perspective, how much do we miss out, right? So if that is real for them, oral tradition, meet them where they're at. In South Africa, and I think I would also say even here in the United States, during apartheid in South Africa, we used music to really connect and be mindful in a collective manner. So the songs that we sang, the dances that we did, and I honestly think I can relate that to the slavery that happened in this country. When you think about this, the Negro spirituals, I hope that's a politically correct term, that is a way that could be taught to other people, right? Drumming is huge, right? So when people drum, you're calling them together, and it's this call response kind of feedback happening. So if we can acknowledge that there are different ways of knowing and not be judgmental about that, how much could we learn, right? So I was raised in a very Western way, but also very fortunate enough to have parents that made sure that we embraced our culture, our identity. So I have both of that, which honestly makes me a richer person than somebody who just has either or. So I think, yeah, for me, that would be the huge thing there. For instance, also talking about Buddhism, the whole notion of Zen, where the writings about Zen coming from Buddhists themselves, right? So this whole cultural appropriation and misrepresentation, I'm this white, skinny lady, I teach yoga, I talk about Zen. Let's get the real people to do it, right? I was watching an interesting segment on body consciousness yesterday on TV. And these, what I would call plus size African-American women, saying that they're fitness instructors. And you saw snippets of them exercising, and they were as fit as the skinniest white woman ever. And challenging that narrative, changing that narrative, opening it up to everybody. I think we just have to make a conscious, intentional effort to do that. Honestly, I think that's what has to be done.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. It makes me think of like my own experiences while being a white woman, but also like getting into this work. And there's that like archetype that all of us are negatively affected by of like, oh, to be mindful and Zen, like I have to be a vegan and like
Right.
wear like yoga pants, and
Right.
how often we've amplified those voices. And actually very recently having a conversation with a colleague who really didn't understand that people of color practice mindfulness, and not knowing where it originated from. And that's
Yeah.
kind of part of the intent of this series, even, is to show not just communities, but to influence Ohio State and our notions of mindfulness, and giving and amplifying diverse understandings, practices, and seeing diverse people. Um,
Yes, that's great.
yeah, so before we close, I know we only have a few minutes left. I wondered if you'd be willing to facilitate a brief mindfulness exercise with us.
Okay, so what comes to mind? So as I was thinking about what we're going to talk about today, I wanted to share what I do personally for mindfulness. So I talked about music earlier on. I sing a lot. I write. So on my Facebook page, I have what I call morning musings. I walk and I bike. This summer has been great for that because it allows me to commune with nature, commune with God, who I believe very strongly in. And so, as a practice per se, I could easily share a therapeutic technique, but I think I would rather do something that's a bit different. So, for me, that would be just singing, right? So singing, and I love to do it when I'm outdoors or when something important happens in my life. So let me think about something that I can sing. It's all going through my mind right now, and I'd love to do it in an African language, which might just give it that flavor of collectiveness. So when we sing, all the voices will come together, the harmonies will come in together. Many times when I post videos of me singing, people will respond, "Oh, I was harmonizing right along with you," right? It just kind of comes automatically to us. But yeah, so I'm trying to think of a song. How about I do our national anthem, the
Yeah,
South African national anthem, uh, Nkosi Sikelele, which means God bless Africa. Africa has been through so much. We've lost so much, but we continue to believe that we are a rich continent. In fact, what we say is that Africa is not a poor continent, it is poorly led. I remember my 13-year-old coming one day home from school, very upset. He was about 9 years old. "Mom, the teacher was telling us Africa is poor." He's at a predominantly white school. And he was very upset because he said, "Mom, you've never told me that. You tell me all these great things." And that's where, I told him about Africa not being poor, but being poorly led, because we talk about the flora, the fauna, the diamonds, the gold. It's all there. So this national anthem, which, by the way, is sang in a number of other African countries in their language, but still the same tune. So Nkosi Sikelele. Nkosi Sikelele Africa, Malupakanyisu Pondolwayo, Izwa imitandazo yetu, Nkosi Sikelele, Tina Usapolwayo, Woza moya, woza moya, woza moya, woza moya, woza moya, oyingwele. So the Woza moya was a call and response. So the men will say Woza moya in their deep baritones, and the females will respond. So again, that whole interconnectedness, that humanity towards others, that Ubuntu.
thank you so much. As soon as you started singing, my body just started to relax and feel less tense than before. And this conversation has been so life-giving to me. And there's so many nuggets that I know I'm going to go back to and listen. I loved how you were emphasizing oral history telling. I loved how much body connection that you brought in. And then just ending on that beautiful song really wrapped it all together. Thank you always for sharing your gift with me. It's truly an honor to have this friendship, and I appreciate everything that you're doing to support my journey, even as we socially distant.
Yes, and you know what? Thanks very much. But I also appreciate you with me because, we talk about allies, and when you find an ally in a white person where you can totally be yourself, the good, the bad, and the ugly, like you are with your own kind, it's such a wonderful feeling because, like I say, we can learn from one another. We have very different experiences, but because I can open myself up to you and you can do the same, then we learn so much from one another.
Yeah, back to your original point. I'm Whitney because you are Primrose.
Right.
Thank you so much today.
You're welcome, friend. Take care.